Welcome back to MythVision Podcast. Your host, Derek Lambert. This is a 3-part series. It was going to be 2, but I'm making it into a 3 with Rabbi Tovia Singer. The contents that are going to be discussed are controversial. If you're a believer of the New Testament, you probably aren't going to enjoy some of the content that's discussed on this video and probably a lot of other ones that we produce here. Do I have a chip on my shoulder? I don't know. I know I love my family and my friends. Every one of them is Christian. I know I don't disrespect their faith, and I don't care that they believe. I just want my own space to be a critic of myself and be a skeptic of what I thought used to be the literal case, the truth. And here at MythVision, we're going to be open-minded to all sorts of ideas. We've dwelled on mythicism quite a lot, but what about historicism? There could have been a historical Jesus. Why are ideas like full preterism rejected by scholarship? Why are they accepted by Christians that believe in full preterism? That's a very minor topic in the grand scheme of Christianity. Like, who are full preterists, right? These things are going to be explored, and I plan on getting other ideas. I really appreciate you guys who've stuck around, and more will come. Your host, Derek Lambert. Oh, and I almost forgot one thing. We are MythVision. Love you guys. Here we go.
So here's again, we can't say with certainty, but we're always, Derek, looking for the anomaly. What is odd? What doesn't fit? That's how we find, God forbid, breast cancer. What tissue stands out, doesn't fit? That's how we find natural gas, diamond. We're looking for anomalies, and here's our anomaly. Our anomaly is a figure who is the most front and center figure in the resurrection accounts. She's everywhere, always in everybody's story. And the stories don't match, but she's always right in the middle. And her name is Mary Magdalene. Now, Magdalene is not her last name. She's Mary from Magdala, and there are quite a few Marys. She's that one. She appears 12 times in the Christian Bible. She is the center figure in every resurrection account. She's there. Mm-hmm. Well, is Salome there? It depends, but she's always there.
Right.
Now, what is even more strange about this is she's almost never in any other part of the entire Christian Bible. You go through the whole Christian Bible, and I use the word almost, with one exception. In Luke 8, chapter 2, Luke chapter 8, verse 2 and 3, we encounter Mary Magdalene like that. And what is she? She has a devil in her, which may mean she was mentally ill. I don't know. But Jesus healed her from 7 devils. That's all we're told. Okay? Right. So she's one of these women that are hanging out with Jesus, who are his followers and his supporters and sponsors. Paul also had a cadre of women that followed him and helped him through. So that would not be unusual. But the key is she's nowhere in the New Testament except for that one verse. Except then when we go to the resurrection, she's everywhere. That is very odd. That means, why would you introduce someone out of nowhere and make her the most central figure in the resurrection accounts? John's account, chapter 20, she's the only one there and sees 2 angels inside the tomb, one at the head, one at the feet, where it was. And she's asking them, what did they do with the Lord? Do you know where they put it? They ask her, why are you crying, woman? She then turns around and sees the gardener. It's a very different story than Matthew 28. Right. The point is, she is the most important figure. And if that were alone, that would be fine. If she was somewhere. But she's nowhere else, except for one exception. She's nowhere else. And therefore, I suspect very highly that after Jesus' death, she's one of these women, like I was seeing in Indonesia, all over the Philippines, India. She is the person who has some sort of vision. That means Jesus came to me. This happens all over the place. And it's around her that this is all set. Moreover, we have something else that is unusual in the Christian Bible that is just unlikely someone would have invented, and that is the doubting passages. Why would texts like in Matthew 28, when the disciples go to the Galilee to meet Jesus and they worshiped him, but some doubted it? Why add some doubted it? That means there are people who are doubting there was a resurrection. Why? Why in 1 Corinthians 15, Paul is writing to people who are questioning whether there was a resurrection? Why? If he's walking around, dead people are coming out of the graves, Matthew 27, he met 500 people resurrected. Why would you throw into the text that there are a lot of people who doubt this, and these are people who shouldn't doubt it, who doubt it? The reason is that people are saying, this is a crazy lady that is saying this stuff, and I'm not convinced that I buy into it, just as in Indonesia, a lot of these women who claim to have met Peter the Great who came under a considerable amount of ridicule for it. So that's what fits together. That's, to me, as I said, this is an Occam's razor deal.
Right.
I mean, what requires the fewest hypotheses to put together what was likely to happen? What is embarrassing? What doesn't fit? And one solution that answers and addresses every one of these questions. To me, this makes the most sense. If what I said is correct, then in a sense, Mary Magdalene, it could be said, invented Christianity.
Very interesting, Rabbi. I really appreciate you taking the time to take me through that the way that you did, because I can see that as being very plausible myself. Question I have, and I've seen you debate before, I think, but I haven't seen too many of them, and I know you've debated Christians before a lot. And now I think you've done a few recorded, but one of my questions was, and it's always the William Lane Craig types that are always debating the resurrection of the dead, etc., that are trying to argue for Jesus. It's an interesting thing how he goes from the Kalam cosmological to, Jesus. But nonetheless, regardless, we're not going to go there. I wanted to ask you if this position is plausible and it is true, and let's speculate and just say, okay, this is the case. You know, this makes the most sense. I'm going to roll with this. What do you suspect? And I know this is just your opinion. I just want your opinion on it. What do you think happened to his body? Do you think the Romans took him away? Do you think they hid him because he was this larger-than-life figure?
No, there was no empty tomb at all. The first and earliest, most primitive view is that a resurrection of the dead did not mean the body resurrected. I know that sounds crazy, but let's stop. We'll put this all together. The earliest texts we have say that the physical body didn't resurrect from the dead. I'm going to take you really deep on this. Now, You're about to say Mark chapter 16, presumably.
Like they
verse
added
8.
on, right? They added on 9
added
and
the last 12 verses. For sure. So Mark does not have a resurrection account. All Mark has is the women, come to the tomb, meet a guy who we'll presume is an angel. He's dressed really well. The point is, he's an angel. And then they're afraid. They say nothing to anyone. Book ends. It's not a mystery how Christian scribes in later centuries would add those 12 verses to comport with a resurrection account in the other gospels. So that's not rocket science, but that's not my source. That's just a little bit, but that's proving from silence. I don't like it.
Okay.
Here's what I do like, because we really kind of go what really went. The answer is 1 Corinthians 15. Paul is and then I'm going to get to the theology behind this.
Okay.
Paul is telling us in 1 Corinthians 15 that the physical body does not resurrect from the dead, and what is resurrected is a spiritual body. This is the language of Paul. So now I need to explain something that's going to be very new to your viewers. The Greeks had a considerable respect for Judaism and Jews. Judaism was an officially recognized religion in the Roman Empire, always was. Okay, Alexander the Great came to the land of Israel, met Jewish leaders here. Jews and Judaism were regarded with considerable esteem by the Greeks. That said, there were some things that the Greeks thought the Jews were nuts for believing. So they thought we were crazy for having a temple. It's huge, our Temple Mount, and there isn't one statue. Like, what? But what was really very striking to the Greeks was that the Jews believed in the physical resurrection of the dead, and the Greeks thought that was the most grotesque, ridiculous thing to believe. So you need to understand the world that we're living. The place of tension between the Jews and the Greeks were on a number of levels. But one thing the Greeks were very outspoken about is the body was a wretched vessel that we look forward to being rid of because it's mortal.
Platonic, right? Like this Platonic.
That's right. Thank you. That's the Platonic thinking. Socrates happily drank a glass of hemlock, killed himself, happily to be rid of his wretched body. Right. No one in the Greco-Roman and the Platonic world hoped to ever go back to that disgusting body. So in Greek thinking, the physical world is limited, and the goal is to enter into the spiritual realm. They all believed in the afterlife, just their afterlife was utterly spiritual. This is the battle line. In Judaism, the physical body is very important, and it becomes sacred by a person who lives his or her life in a way that elevates the physical to the spiritual, and therefore the resurrection of the dead is material, it's physical, it's literal, and the body is a very good thing. When you eat, just make sure it's food you're allowed to eat. When you are intimate with someone, make sure it's your wife and not somebody else's wife, but it's all considered very
I love
holy.
This, by the way. I love this.
So this is on how to understand the brain of God, and that is the physical body was created by God, and it is sacred. Now, we can desecrate, destroy our bodies. We can live a hedonistic life. We could say we're not going to do anything to infuse any holiness in our lives, and then that person does not resurrect from the dead.
Can I mention a few things?
Please.
These are things that I think are interesting that I talk about on my show a lot, such as kosher diet, eating whatever Paul says. Hey, do what you want. Dealing with Torah. I mean, he's like, the law's done away with. Are you kidding me? That is anti. That's not just that's not just hey, we're gonna have a little bit of a difference. Yeah, he's absolutely flipping everything on its head down to the afterlife. So I love where you're going. My audience has been watching for a long time, and they've been listening to me say this about Christianity, and there are groups that still try to do this, and I think Christianity mistakenly connected the resurrection somehow to this Jewish idea of physical, and they've made it...
I'm going to explain this.
Okay,
I'm going to explain
I'll
this.
shut up.
I need to walk through, so
I love
please
this.
shut up. I'm kidding. Just
I will.
Walk with me. Now, notice what I'm also doing here with you on the show. I'm not going and coming up with some UFO stuff. I don't believe in UFOs. If you don't want to watch me anymore, just know I don't. If I see evidence for it, I'll change my mind in a second. But everything I'm telling you is I'm building this is really Cicero's Republic, Volume 6.
I'm with you.
He goes into this all this. That means what I'm telling you. I'm impressed that you understood this about Platonic thinking. So Platonic thinking is that this is a dualism. Mm-hmm. And this is, by the way, where Gnosticism is going to grow from. Gnosticism is this dualistic world, but it's like on acid, where there's, the bad gods who created this world and then the good gods, and so it's like just hyped up. But Gnosticism didn't fall out of nowhere. It was born out of this thing. So this thinking is that the physical world is a lower realm, and then the spiritual realm is the higher realm, and that's the goal. There's no this world, what eat, pork, doesn't matter, but the spiritual world is what matters. Now, Paul is reflecting exactly that. To resurrect from the dead in the Greek world. Remember, Paul is from Tarsus. Tarsus is one of two centers, or let's say one of three major centers in the ancient world of Greek reflection and philosophy. That was like Harvard. That was like being in, in Cambridge. I mean, that's the center. Paul is conveying this. Paul is saying, if you take a seed, these are not words, these are his words. If you take a seed, he's criticized people who don't get the resurrection right. If you take a seed and put it in the ground, the seed dies. It's gone. And what comes out, the plant, is something totally different. Now, he happens to be wrong on seeds don't die, but let's just say they do, and it's a metaphor. I'm willing to be charitable with him. Whatever.
Okay.
But Paul's whole point is that the resurrected body is a spiritual body. Those are his words. It's not the physical body that resurrected. Now, 1 Corinthians is definitely from the hands of Paul. It's written, let's say, 55. That's early stuff, much older than the Gospels. And therefore, now, what happens is the following. This is where you just need to stay really close on. The Jewish view of the resurrection of the dead, you can see it could be very attractive. Why? Because dying is, for most people, it's a frightening idea.
Yeah. Because
dying is a nightmare. I mean, dying is even worse because not only do you get tapped on the shoulder and told you have to leave the party, but the party goes on without you, which makes it even worse. So the idea that you get to come back could be very attractive. The resurrection of the dead, the physical resurrection of the dead, is very attractive. And that's why you alluded to this earlier, that Judaism was a very popular religion in the first century. It was a tremendous amount of conversion to Judaism. So the Greeks were not winning this fight because it was very attractive to people and made sense. It's sort of what made sense that we're not just highly intelligent dogs, but we are totally unique. And this is, we stand upright. We're vertical. Everything else is horizontal. We're just totally unique in so many ways. Our ability of speech and so on. This is holy. We sense that. We know there's something wrong with adultery. We intuit it.
Yeah.
We know why do we intuit it? Because we're creating the image of God. And if you've got a pet at home, a dog, sweet, you love him, your cat, your dog's not creating the image of God. We are. No animal ever believed in God. Only humans do, because we are creating the image of God. We intuit God. The only thing is there are things we don't understand, not because we have a different value system than God, but rather like the difference between a sergeant and a general. The sergeant and the general in the U.S. Army have the same goals and the same values. The other thing is the general just sees a much bigger picture than the sergeant does. We are creating the image of God. Therefore, the commandments resonate to us. Animals could be killing each other, committing incest, murdering babies so that the mother goes into heat again, and we're going, well, that's fine. But for us, we know that's just evil. That means there's something inside of us that's different. It's not, atheists often go, oh, I don't need God to tell me thou shalt not steal. I can figure it out myself. I'm going, no, you can't, because animals are always stealing stuff from other people, from other dogs. That's why they intuitively hide their bone. And even dogs and Hashem put that in there. And they don't, if you told a dog, but it's wrong to steal, if a dog could speak, he would say, what are you talking about? They don't even know what you're talking about.
Right.
So the key is this: we are creating the image of God, and therefore the commandments resonate. It just makes sense not to sleep with my sister. It's not that I'm not attracted to her. It's just there's something wrong about that. There's something wrong about a man sleeping with his daughter. There's just wrong. There's something intrinsically wrong. And the only thing is there are events that occur in life that we observe that we can't explain, and that also we would expect, because God's mind is infinite, ours is limited, and God sees a larger picture. And sometimes we get to figure out what God was doing, sometimes we don't. We have just trust that he has the bigger picture, and if he created this whole thing, he sure does. So let's get back to the resurrection. Early Christians were not looking for an empty tomb. Now, I'm going to say something in a few moments that's going to blow your mind away.
Okay, so I'm loving this.
Resurrection of the dead in the Greek world did not mean physical resurrection of the dead and requiring an empty tomb. The body could be there. The resurrection is the soul and a spiritual body. These are the words of Paul. I'm not inventing this. This is no conspiracy. This is just read 1 Corinthians 15 yourself. That's the crucifixion chapter. I mean, this is the case that Paul makes. Now, you can imagine as Christianity is developing, of course, there are people who are very aware of what the Jews believe, and that's the physical resurrection of the dead. Mark, as you pointed out, lacks any resurrection account at all. The last 12 chapters, 12 passages, meaning Mark 16:9 through 16:20, is in it later interpreted. We know that. We know that. All our manuscripts, we know that. That's just known. Everyone concedes that point. And then what's clearly happening in the first century is that Christians are not satisfied with Paul's version, with this Platonic understanding. They want the physical resurrection because the Jews are promising a physical resurrection. That's always a part of Judaism. Daniel 12:2, Isaiah 26:19. The grave is only a temporary dwelling place, Isaiah tells us. The body is that's why bones don't disappear. They can't burn, because they're made out of calcium, and calcium can't burn. In the never get cremated, whoever you are watching the show. It's a terrible thing. They grind the bones down. The bones are preserved for the resurrection. And it's very clear that Christianity is then going to turn back, even though it's moved away from Judaism with Paul. The resurrection of the physical body, that you come back physically to this earth, becomes very popular. And how do I know this? Because we see Matthew, Luke, and John introducing it further and further, insisting that Jesus' resurrection was a physical resurrection. And the further you move out in trajectory, the stories become more and more intriguing. Luke has an example where you have the room where everyone is gathered together, and Jesus just appears in the room in Jerusalem. Remember, Luke's story doesn't have the disciples go to the Galilee as everybody else does. And then Jesus is eating burnt fish with them. And not only that, in case you're wondering, in case I'm making this up or reading it, Jesus then, we are told, turns to everybody watching his resurrected body eating and drinking and asks them, how then does a spirit eat and drink? That can't be. So Luke is going, oh, no. Now, Luke isn't saying don't listen to Paul, but Luke is conjured up this story. What difference? Did he eat French fries? Did he blow his nose? That story is there, and he's telling you why it's there. They're pushing back. No, Jesus' resurrection is physical. Whatever you thought back earlier. And then we get to John and Doubting Thomas.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask. It's kind of a subtle way. You can use the narrative in a subtle way to really see that it's actually dealing with previous doctrine and building upon to correct it, so to speak.
Exactly.
And Thomas, he's like, touch it, touch my hands and my feet and my side. So
John chapter 20, look it up, John chapter 20, verse 24, 25, 26, and he physically touches the holes in his hands. And then Jesus bless them, blessed are those who believe without touching. So John is like shoving this further. This is physical. So what happens is that Christianity, of course, is emerging with Paul in the Platonic sense. Resurrection you don't need an empty tomb for that. But what happens then is you have people that's unsatisfying. I mean, I'm just going to resurrect spiritually, but I will never eat again. I will never kiss my kids again. I will never kiss my wife again. Like, this is just disappears forever. You can understand why Judaism is, for many reasons, including the Senate is electing horses. I mean, you can say you can't be that religious with these kind. So Judaism is enormously popular, and this then moves back into narrative. If we leave the canon, we can go further. We can go to the Gospel of Peter, which didn't make it in, almost did, where we have our only scene of Jesus actually walking out of the tomb with the cross and angels accompanying him.
Right.
And it's a walking, talking cross. So the further you go, the more they want to get it's physical. Now, I want to show you something that's going to just smoke your brain out the window.
You know me already. You know me pretty well, so please do.
So now it's mind-blowing time, and I'm not going to disappoint you. Just fasten the seatbelt.
I actually believe every word you're saying, so yes,
okay,
this is good.
So it's good.
Yeah.
That's good, because what I'm going to do, despite the fact that you find what I'm saying convincing, I'm going to always show you exactly what it says, exactly what I'm saying, and you don't have to put anything in the text.
Okay.
Why would someone go back to a tomb to find it empty? I mean, hopefully you never did, but logically you probably were at a funeral, and probably, hopefully not, but you possibly heard of or saw a burial in your life.
Yeah.
Do you know of anybody in the universe that went back to the grave 3 days later? The answer is no. Nobody does.
Not to search to see if it's, yeah.
No, nobody goes back. Now, you go back if you want to put flowers there. You go back to eventually a tombstone is made, whatever tradition it is, and there's an unveiling of the tombstone. That's whatever. Sure, every Veterans Day, people go, whatever, but people don't go back to the tomb. Okay. Why were they going back to the tomb? As it turns out, you don't need Rabbi Tovia Singer to tell you. This is explicitly told us in the Gospels, particularly in Mark. I want to turn you to Mark chapter 15. I want to turn to Mark chapter 15, last verse 47, and chapter 16, verse 1. We're told the same thing in Luke chapter 24. The reason is that Jesus was buried in such a rush that there was no time to anoint his body and put spices on his body. So they went, after the Sabbath was over, they went back to the tomb to add spices and anoint his body. Okay? So this is not like a guess. This is not like I have to speculate. This is explicitly stated there. You just open it up for yourself, and it's right there. It tells you let's put this whole story on pause.
Okay.
What? You got to put spices with a body? Like, where does that come from? This is going to, again, if you're standing with a frying pan, you want to sit down. Or we can go to the last verse of Luke 23 and the first verse of Luke 24, verse 1. Exactly the same thing. Okay. The women go back to the tomb. We are told why. Because they want to put spices and anoint the body.
Right, a dead body.
Now, the question is, what is going on here? Why do you need spices? Are we making chicken soup here? Like, why are we putting spices? Do we need rosemary and... Well, I know that was being silly, but why? All right, so as it turns out, there's no mention in the Torah that there's a commandment to put spices with the body. Why? But we know from Jewish literature that this was done, that spices were put with the body. Why? It's all over the place. It's very simple. Let's go back to a world of no refrigeration. Let's go back to a world where it's, in a part of Israel, it's 95 degrees. Just a little bit of science here, not much. The moment anything dies, any person dies, the process of decay and decomposition begin immediately. Immediately. Okay? And this is not cooked flesh, which could sit around a while longer. If you ever left a piece of raw chicken out, I don't mean to just say, you know what happened? You forgot you left the chicken. The next day, it's a nightmare, okay? Now, what did they do? Could you imagine, Derek, something of a greater disgrace to a body that it takes time? Person dies, there's no refrigerator, nothing. It's hot. The body is decaying. It's going to give off a very foul odor. What could be a greater disgrace to someone who you wish to honor than that person's body being carried to the place of the eulogy, being taken to the place of burial, whoever time that takes, that the body begins to have a foul odor? By the way, this idea of bodies having foul odor is found with the Lazarus story. This was the big, big problem. Could you imagine something that's a greater, it's called a bizoyin hames, which is forbidden. You can't allow anything to in any way humiliate the body of a dead person. And there's nothing more grotesque than a person who you loved, who's died, and the person's body is smelling as the eulogy is going on. So, in the ancient world, they had a way to solve this whole problem. What do? They had different recipes of spices that were very strong that they would just put next to the body so as they would have a kind of a liquid, and they would mix spices in. They just had a very strong odor to it, a pleasant odor that would completely neutralize the foul odor coming from a decaying body. You got that? And sometimes if it was a really horrible situation, this is all over Jewish literature. We have this endless. They even had methods that if it was a really bad situation, it took longer than usual. They had certain spices that they would burn the spices, and the smoke that would come from burning these spices would be very strong, and no one would smell the body. Whole point of putting spices with the body is to mask the odor of decay so as to honor the dead until you put the body in the ground. Once the body is in the ground, then nobody smells anything. It's finished. Or if it's in a tomb, or if it's in a mausoleum, whatever it is, once it's buried, no one might smell it. That's not relevant anymore, okay? Right. That means, just listen to me because this is just
I don't want it to go over my head.
No one goes back to a tomb that the person is buried or interred and opens it to put spices inside. The guy is already buried. Right. The guy is already interred. The story doesn't make sense. The story is complete nonsense. That means this is a plot device that was invented to explain why anyone would go back to the tomb. It never happened. No one goes back to tombs. First, this is an aside. As it turns out, we do wash the body of the dead. Men wash the body of a man who dies, and women. It's also considered this way. You would never have women washing and anointing a body with spices. I mean, you're having women anoint and wash the naked body of a man, of Jesus. That just never happened. That just will never happen in the Jewish world. Never. Women care for the dead of a woman who's passed away, men. But that is the smaller case. That's minor. The massive thing is there was no empty tomb. This device was invented. Now, what happens later is John corrects this. If you go to the story in John, so he corrects this with a figure we only found in the book of John, that's Nicodemus. When Nicodemus adds the spices before the Sabbath in the book of John. Okay. Which, of course, contradicts Mark and Luke completely. I am not introducing this to say, we got a big contradiction. John says spices were added before the burial, which would have been, that's a correction. That's an improvement. We're now putting spices in with the body before it is buried.
Right, which would make sense. They caught
makes
it much later.
But no one, why would you dig up a grave?
You wouldn't.
Of course he wouldn't. It was dead. The whole point is that during the eulogy, during the carry of the burial, there's no hearse that's driving down Interstate 80 at 90 miles an hour. Right. This is a slow process to all being done. The grave has to be dug. They don't have a backhoe for this. The point is that spices are there only until the body is interred. Then it's complete nonsense to believe that anyone went to add spices after the guy's dead. That story is, there is no the point is that the empty tomb story is nonsense. And now you ask the question, you viewer may ask the question, how come I never heard of this? This makes complete sense. How come I never heard of it? And the reason is, my friends, I'm going to give you this straight. I'm talking to you eye to eye, man to man. Unless you live in the Jewish world and you're a part of the religious Jewish Orthodox world, that's what this is, Pharisaic, this is original Judaism. You're just not acquainted with this. So the whole notion of putting spices with the body is, I don't know, maybe people did put spices in. We forgot to do it before the burial. Let's make sure we get the spices in, or the guy can't go to heaven or something. So the reason why people just, even scholars, PhDs, they never ever figure this out is they're utterly unfamiliar with Jewish life. The only Jew they know is the guy who does their taxes, and and the guy who defends, or the guy moguls in Hollywood.
Right.
They know that these guys are Jewish somehow, but that's it. Nobody knows Jewish life intimately except for religious Jews, not Jews who are irreligious, secular Jews who'd never go to temple. I'm not talking about those. If you are such a Jew, please don't be offended. I'm not trying to be offensive, but I want to make this point.
Well, that was actually if you don't mind me plugging, this is why I wanted you to join me on the program. And I'm not hiding anything. I wanted you because I knew that you would know the internal world of the Jew and every aspect that was important, because if anyone would show and be able to do so well showing, and you were well articulated, you knew your stuff, the differences between the Jewish Bible and Christianity, I knew you'd be the guy because you were coming at it from a Jewish world. I mean, you can smell the stench. That doesn't smell like the Jewish Bible. Okay, that does not smell like that.
You are, Derek. I have been a broadcaster for many years, more years than you've been alive. Okay, I have never heard a person that got this point as you did. Not about me, but I'm so great, but you got it. That's exactly correct. You have to be in the Jewish world. There is a concept in the study of history called verisimilitude. It's two Latin words combined. It means that you've got to understand the world, the culture of whatever you're studying. If you're studying the Christian world, meaning you're studying the Jewish world, if you understand, you want to understand if anything happened, you've got to understand what the Jewish world is like. And one of the things about Judaism is we're not really a changing religion. I can go to I hope you come to Israel one day, Derek. I'll take you to the place where the Dead Sea Scrolls are on view for everyone to see. It's in the Israel Museum and the Rockefeller Museum.
I would love to.
I could look at a text that's 2,200 years old and just read it to you straight away the way you'd read a newspaper. Conversely, Derek, you're a native English speaker, you're an American. If I read Chaucer to you, if I read someone speaking English in the 13th century, meaning the 1200s, you wouldn't understand the word they're saying.
No.
And how do I know this? And we don't have recording. There are guys who just study this. I lecture at a lot of universities, and there are professors of this who study and teach ancient English. What did it sound like? And the funniest thing is I had professors who, we talk about this, who teach this stuff at America's best universities. In fact, you can go on YouTube, try it for yourself, and go, what does Middle or Old English sound like? And this is all guys doing. I'd kill this is like, what could be more boring? But what did it sound like to speak English in the 1200s? Like, what did it sound like? Did it just mean like you sound like you're from Alabama?
No.
It sounded like someone was speaking, I don't know, some German, Dutch. You could only imagine it. You would not be able to make any sense. Zero. So I can listen to or read Hebrew, and that's 2,000 years old, and I know exactly what they're saying. I know exactly what they're experiencing. I know it because it's a part of a world that's a sacred world. It's a world that we are committed to not changing. That's what Judaism is. We don't change because of fashion. And the people who study this, it was so-called New Testament scholars, and they are. I don't mean no disrespect. But they're just not intimately, personally familiar with the Jewish world, right. And as such, they don't get it.
I have to agree with you. They can't agree amongst themselves what certain things mean. They also, and don't get me wrong, I know that there are also probably rabbis who and they debate 24/7 over text and what they mean and maybe ideas, but I'm trying to come at it and say, okay, why is it every time I read a commentary, they can't even get this New Testament thing, and this is obviously contrary to what the Jewish Bible says. And so, if you don't mind, Rabbi, I'd like to close us out with one more touch on this. If you have any ideas that come to mind, something here, we'll close out, because I want to do shows with you. We can talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls and your ideas, your personal thoughts, because I've actually had Dr. Robert Eisenman as a guest on our show at one point, and he's getting up there in age, so he's forgetting more than he remembers, and he was talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls. I've had other guys come on, but just to get your thoughts on it. I know that that's not your particular field of research.
Yeah, but you know what? This is something I'm fairly familiar with. I'm going to say for now the thing that you, the viewer, have to keep in mind. The Dead Sea Scrolls began with the discovery in 1947 with the Bedouin Muhammad Adib discovering Cave 1. Okay, just that's the point is we would subsequently find many other caves with hundreds and hundreds of scrolls, with a fragment of hundreds of scrolls. Some scrolls intact, some not. Great Isaiah scroll is on display in the Israel Museum. The most important thing to bear in mind is that because we have texts, so the scrolls are texts that were written somewhere from, let's just say, 1st, 2nd century BCE. There's nothing written in the 1st century. There's corrections. Just right now, take my word for it.
Right.
1st century BC, that's where all the scrolls are from. The key is that they're virtually, I say virtually, identical to the text, the Hebrew text. The word Masoretic gets people scared. So I'm going to avoid that word.
Okay.
And maybe we could do another show and talk about what does that word add. So let's do that, because it's, to people, this is like, oh, mess around. So let's use the word Hebrew for right now, okay? So just take my word for right now that Hebrew is a consonantal language and there are no vowels. The vowels are added, and there's a written system that was developed later. But like, imagine a paragraph of English and you just erased every vowel, deleted them. No vowels. Well, you might figure out what it says. You'd probably at first be very confused, because that's not the way you're used to reading an English paragraph that has no A, E, I, O, U. And sometimes why. You would go, what am I looking at here? But you'd probably eventually make it out, just like you get an SMS text message from someone, right? So people are typically using auto text SMSing, where you're just running your fingers rather than just tapping. And invariably, when you're SMSing someone or sending someone a Facebook message, you misspell something and you just don't correct it. And so there's one word that just doesn't fit at all. So you go, okay, you look at it and you could probably go, I think that's what was misspelled there. Okay? So the point is that the Hebrew text of the Dead Sea Scrolls, that means the Tanakh, the Hebrew scriptures, and what we have today are virtually identical.
Right.
There are variances. I discuss those variances, and it would be too stretched for me to. It's way, but the most important takeaway. And if anyone tells you something else that I'm telling you, they don't know what they're talking about. There are many things that are very valuable about the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's the most important biblical archaeological find of the 20th century. That's indisputable. But if I had to put in order what's the single most important takeaway, there is no disagreement on this. And that is that the integrity of the Tanakh, of the Hebrew Bible, has been preserved. What we have today is, I say virtually, but it's almost identical. There are variances, and I can prove to you that those variances are the result of somebody making a dumb mistake back then, not today, but that's for another show, Derek. Yeah. Anyway, so that's the key for you.
I agree. I've actually heard that more than once, so you're just reinstituting that idea. And Rabbi, how many books do you have?
I have a number of books written over the years, but I essentially put it all together
Is there a website?
2 big volumes. Okay, so number one, I'm going to say this: outreachjudaism.org. Outreachjudaism.org, O-R-G. And there you can get my books, or you can just go on Amazon. So Tovia Singer, there's a 2-volume series called Let's Get Biblical. Not kidding. Why doesn't Judaism accept the Christian Messiah? Where I go through all this stuff in much more detail than I could now. Because in books, you could just put more in and people can take their time going through it. So there's a 2-volume series called Let's Get Biblical. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it on our website. And that's what I would recommend if someone wants to really go with this.
Absolutely. OutreachJudaism.org. Be sure to check out the description down below, guys. You can actually get over there and check his stuff out. I'm really glad that you joined me here on the show because I think we have some future endeavors that we can definitely do, and I do plan to come to Israel one day. When we do, I'm going to hit you up for sure, and I'm excited.
Wonderful.
Well, thank you so much for this long show or multiple shows here, and I really appreciate that. We need to plan again. I'll come up with some ideas, throw them your way, and I really appreciate you joining me here at MythVision Podcast.
Always. Shalom.
Thank you.